It's a pleasure to have you join us at this time for Politics Today, live on Channels Television. And we're all set to give you all the updates you need to know right now in the nation. Let's begin tonight's program by telling you that President Muhammadu Buhari is expected to travel out of the country tomorrow. The presidency today said the president will proceed to London in the United Kingdom for a scheduled medical follow-up and is due back in the country during the second week of July 2021. The president traveled on a similar trip at the end of March this year and returned in the mid of April. For those of you who are thinking already about 2023, if you're just going to be 18 by the next election or this year, this information is very important for you because you need now to register, or you've registered and you need to update it. You need to listen carefully. Although the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, is worried about the state of insecurity in the country as it plans to begin the continuous voter registration. The INEC chairman, Professor Mahmoud Yakubu, is raising concern about the safety of its staff and equipment. The commission says it will now embark on the registration in phases, with the online portal opening on the 28th of June, followed by scheduled appointments with those who have concluded their online process before physical capturing of prospective voters. And it plans to deploy 5,346 staff and equipment to various centers across the country. Take a listen to Professor Mahmoud Yakubu, the chairman of INEC.
As we are aware, the Commission has had the sad experience of recent attacks on our offices across the country. In most cases, these offices have been burnt or vandalized. Clearly, the aim of the attackers was to undermine the Commission's capacity to organize elections and other electoral activities, including the CBR. Although the attacks have subsided, the Commission is still deeply worried about the threat they could pose to registrants and our staff during the CBR. As a result of this profound concern, the Commission has decided to modify the schedule for the CBR as follows. Number 1, commencement of online registration only, Monday, 28th June 2021. Number 2, commencement of scheduled appointments for online registrants, 19th July 2021. And finally, commencement of physical CBR at all other registration centers. The date is to be determined based on evaluation of the security situation, and the location, as I said earlier, will be in the 2,763 registration centers nationwide.
Professor Mahmoud Yakubu there, the INEC chairman, is listed out those scheduled for you, so you are up to date. So Channel Television will bring you up-to-date information at that continual voter registration. But before we get talking with my guest tonight, because we're talking about tonight on something that is very critical for you as citizens and for the nation, the sustenance of our common good. So, but before we get into that, let's quickly check out some of your political roundup stories.
President Muhammadu Buhari today appears very busy, especially with receiving guests at the State House in Abuja. The president hosted leaders of the Ijaw Kingdom and the Ijaw National Congress, led by King Alfred Diete Spiv, the Amayanabo of Tuan Bras Bayelsa State. The Senate President Ahmed Lawan also visited, but the president had presided over the National Space Research and Development Agency meeting.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
The Inter-Party Advisory Council is asking the federal government to urgently address the increasing cases of insecurity in the country, which is preventing farmers from accessing their farms. The national chairman of the council, Mr. Leonard Nzewa, says there is a cloud of uncertainty across the country, which does not augur well for the well-being of Nigeria as a united nation.
Key economic indicators are slow and businesses are stifled. This is a time bomb that needs to be addressed urgently.
The resident electoral commissioner of the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, in Ondo State, Ambassador Rufus Akeju, has called on residents of the state who intend to take part in the forthcoming continuous voter registration exercise that they'll need to submit their enrollment information online via the Commission's website. Mr. Akeju says the online portal for the CVR will be available for all prospective registrants to access until the year 2022. The Nasarawa State Governor, Abdullahi Sule, has called for collective efforts towards the fight against crime. He made the call at the inaugural meeting of the Middle Belt Brain Trust, which held in Lafia, the Nasarawa State capital.
As a government, we shall continue to welcome initiatives that will assist us towards consolidating our collective commitment to promote peaceful coexistence for socio-economic development of the society.
The Senate President, Ahmed Lawan, says Nigerians will not have reasons to pay more taxes, but the country may have to continue to borrow responsibly to fund the budget because, according to him, the country is poor. Senator Ahmed Lawan said that this today after a closed-door meeting with President Muhammadu Buhari in Abuja. It was said our correspondent that, owing to limited options, the National Assembly will give legislative approval to the executive loan required to fund the 2021 Appropriation Act before it embarked on a recess in July. Take a listen to him.
What I want to assure Nigerians here is that we are not going to be frivolously supporting or approving loans for the executive arm of government. Whenever we have to approve any loan, we have to insist on the details of what projects will be funded for those by those loans. We have to look at the conditions that are attached to the loans. There must be favorable conditions before we approve, and we will be up to date with our oversight to ensure that what we have approved is directly deployed and on those projects that we have also approved for implementation. We don't have the necessary revenues. Nigeria is poor. We shouldn't deceive ourselves. Nigeria is not rich. Given the circumstances we live in, given the challenges we have, our resources are so low, our revenues are so low, and therefore the option of not doing anything, just to sit because we have no money, we shouldn't go for infrastructure development, is not even an option worthy of consideration. You cannot keep the economy stagnant. Two, you cannot, in my view and judgment, tax Nigerians further for you to raise the money for infrastructure development. Other countries do that, but we have serious situation across the country. So you cannot put taxes on people. The other option is public-private partnership. You need to create the environment to attract investors to come into your country.
For more on the issues of the supplementary budget and the revenue challenges and the Buhari administration in handling some of these issues relating to borrowing and the plans, let's speak with the Director General of the Budget Office, Mr. Ben Akabueze. He joins us virtually from Abuja. It's good to see you, Mr. Akabueze. Thank you so much for joining us. Sometimes the reality dawns on you when your problem is now being repeated for emphasis sake in your eyes and in your face. When the Senate President said Nigeria is poor, we know we've had revenue challenges. Perhaps for some reasons, it's now sinking more and more, and it's dawning on us that we'll have a major problem on our hands. So let's begin the conversation, Mr. Akabueze. Nigeria is poor. Does it not make sense to, it does look now that we're compounding our own problem with debt. Isn't it commonsensical for us to consume what we can afford? For example, because this is a political program, it's not an economic program, and I want you to break it down for Nigerians to understand the manner in which you are handling the economy alongside your colleagues. And this is perhaps from a layman point of view. let's assume Nigeria is out of job and is poor. It doesn't have as much revenue. But is it commonsensical for it to be going out to be asking for more loans?
Well, thank you, Sheung. First of all, I think that it's important, first of all, for that point to sink in to Nigerians that we're not a rich country. We're a potentially rich country. But the reality today is that, we are a poor country, okay? Because, under the definition of poverty, I mean, when the resources you have simply cannot, cover your needs, you're poor. But you see, at the level of individuals, sometimes the decision as to what to do is easier. Okay, well, you don't have enough. You can beg if you can find where to beg. You can whatever. You can make certain decisions. You just, you can decide not to eat, go hungry, fast, starve, whatever. But at the level of the nation, it's perhaps not that straightforward. Because at the level of the nation, for instance, government has certain mandatory obligations. So for instance, government has, the Constitution says it is a primary duty of function of government, the security and welfare of the people. And so when the security of the people is threatened, government can't simply, throw its hand up in the air and say, well, we don't have money. Therefore nothing doing. So there's some mandatory obligations that government has to the people, which, it's got to figure out a way to deal with. And globally, borrowing is one of the ways that government does that. As long as, government has its eyes on sustainability, you'll be hard to find that country around the world that doesn't borrow. So borrowing per se is not an issue. And sustainability is simply about keeping your eyes on making sure that when it's time to pay up what you've borrowed, that you can do so.
Because, I've heard this from the debt management office, the head of the debt management office. I've also heard this from you. I've heard it from the minister that, look, it's not the debt that is a problem if we are still within a cap that is reasonable. But it does look like you pay the debt with cash. We have a revenue problem. That means we are low on cash. Revenue is dwindling. And we have an increase in debt. And realistically, Mr. Kabwe, if you look at it, and the handling of the Buhari government, as of 2015, our debt profile altogether was around the region of 12 trillion. But now in 2021, it's over 30 trillion. It's more than double. And it brings fear to the minds of Nigerians. You said we are potentially rich, and you pay debt in cash.
Well, first of all, some of that growth is simply, exchange rate translation. So if you owed $1 billion in 2015, and say the exchange rate was, just for illustration's sake, 200 naira to the dollar, that $1 billion would be $200 billion. Today, without adding any dime to how much you owe, if the exchange rate is 400, that same $1 billion will be, 400 billion naira. And on the face of it, it will seem like, in naira terms, your debt has doubled. So I'm just saying this is part of the explanation for this, the foreign currency component of the debt. Okay. In naira terms has the same, but it's also, true that government has taken on substantially more loans since 2015. First, there was the recession of 2016, 2017. As you will recall, in 2015, oil prices tanked, and leading up into 2016, and that triggered, a recession for many oil-producing and oil-dependent economies. And we weren't an exception, and so that created a need to borrow. When an economy goes into recession, and that's part of why I was saying that how nations act sometimes not necessarily the same as how an individual would act. In a recession, nations tend to act counter-cyclically. In a recession, when you find yourself in a recession, what you suggest is, okay, I don't have much money, and therefore I shouldn't spend. But the time-tested way to get out of recession is what is called spending your way out of recession.
All right,
so
Mr. Kabweze, sorry, apologies to cutting into your line of thought. Please hold it for a moment because we're due for a break. But when we come back, you explain more to us about the need for this government to borrow. Obviously, there more has been borrowed. The question is, can we sustain it? Is it commonsensical for us to continue in the trajectory in which we're going? And we are testing the pulse of our pocket, our revenue, and our loans tonight. Don't go anywhere, everyone. We'll be right back. Thank you so much, everyone, for staying with us right here on Politics Today on Channels Television. Let's get back with the conversation. Our focus is drew from what the Senate President said. Look, that Nigeria is poor, but he says we must continue to borrow. So for a moment, you say, hey, don't we need to take a break on this borrowing, because it does look like we've gone double the amount we borrowed, or where the profile we were at in 2015, and now we are way over the 30 trillion mark in our debt profile. But Mr. Kabweze is the Director General of the Budget Office of the Federation, and he has been speaking to us on this matter. Let me allow you to continue on that trajectory you were on. You are explaining the reasons why we got into where we are.
Well, Sean, before the break, I was just explaining that, when the economy went into recession 2016 to 2017, the response was to try and spend our way out of recession, which is, that is classical economics. And so in the absence of the revenues, we resorted to borrowing. And thankfully, we got out of the recession, in quick order, and, launched the economic recovery and growth plan. But while we were still in the growth phase, the recovery phase, before we could actually hit, significant growth, COVID-19 came again and basically took us back into recession. And so each of these incidents, recessions, have meant that your capacity to generate revenues were diminished. But at the same time, you have, requirements. When COVID hit, it took away your revenue generating capacity, but it left you with a health problem. You're not going to roll over and say to your citizens, sorry, we don't have money, so you can all go and die. So government had to come with a 500 billion naira COVID intervention fund. This was not part of what you had planned to spend in 2020. So, but what started as a health a health crisis very quickly snowballed into a major economic a crisis, only compared to what the world witnessed, back in 1929, 1930, the Great, Depression. So again, you've got to walk your way, out of this. Having said this, however, okay, our revenue challenge, yes, the recession, COVID-19 have compounded it. But the truth is that we've had what you might describe as a systemic revenue challenge. We've had this revenue challenge has been with us for a long time. It's been with us for the past couple of decades. We just haven't dealt with it as we should. We haven't focused enough in the times when we should on taxation. We haven't focused enough in optimizing yield from our national assets. So today we find ourselves as cash poor but asset rich. And you were talking earlier about how an individual will respond when an individual finds themselves going through a bout of poverty, but they have assets. The rational thing they will do is try and sell down some of the assets to generate cash. But again, that's the difference between the individual and government. Government, especially in a democracy, has to listen to the people and to respond. The general sentiment of Nigerians now seems resistant to selling some of what they call national assets. So
all right.
Again, government is being a bit tentative about going in that direction. But certainly it's something that we must consider. You can't be asset rich, be cash poor, and only resort to borrowing as an option.
All right.
There is only a limit to which we can borrow, and so we must at this point seriously begin to look at the options of generating revenues, of cutting costs that we need to cut, and selling assets that are not that core to our existence as a nation, and which we can do without and generate some cash, even if that cash is reinvested in creating new forms of assets that are strategic, or in investing in our human capital that down the road will actually then yield greater returns for us.
Mr. Kabweze,
investment in currently holding those assets.
Yeah, definitely. There seems to be some very difficult situation that we are in because, as you mentioned, if you translate the debt that we are on because of the foreign exchange, the exchange of dollar about a year and a half ago, which is around the region of 300, the money, because we're servicing some of this money in foreign currency. And if you look at our foreign exchange now, the exchange from the naira to the dollar is about 404 naira to the dollar. It does mean that we may have about $10 billion in more as a burden. This is one of the problems. But I would like you to clarify a few things. We have just a few minutes to go. But there are a few businesses that I want us to clarify quickly before we go. One thing is that I understand part of the supplementary budget is about defense, health, and all of that. I understand that Nigeria is going to be paying about 895 billion or so in the issues of vaccines. But, I mean, there are donors across the world in the COVAX facility. Why are we buying vaccines when some other countries are giving nations like Nigeria for free? That money can be plowed into something else.
Well, Sean, the COVAX pledged vaccines up to 42 point something million, units or so, or persons, to cover up to that number of persons. But COVAX has only been able to supply Nigeria 3.94 million units of vaccines, and there was no firm commitment as to when it will come, because the vaccines they were supplying Nigeria were coming out of India, AstraZeneca, and when India hit its crisis, India embargoed exports on vaccines until they vaccinate a target percentage of their people, and so there's no exports of the AstraZeneca. And so what COVAX doesn't produce the vaccines. COVAX is a fund put together of donors to buy vaccines, to pay for vaccines and give us free. We're still waiting for those to come. But in the interim, no country is going to fold his arms and say, okay, until the donors come through, nothing doing. And so under the auspices of the African Union working with the African Export-Import Bank, they launched an initiative called the AVAD, the African Vaccine acquisition trust. And it is through that Nigeria has made a commitment to buy some vaccines to take care of its people. You can't, leave your people to the mercy of whenever, the COVAX is able to provide the free vaccines.
So then, Mr. Akabo is
by the way, the 895 billion naira is not to buy vaccines. It's 89 billion naira of this amount that is for vaccine.
Yeah. So let me quick. I have two questions, and quickly, I'm being told I have just about 60 seconds to close. If you can help me quickly. The first thing, one of the headlines today is the fact that our petrol smuggling has risen to about 42 million, and it does look like it's jacked up the consumption of our petrol, the liter that we consume daily, and the stories are saying that subsidy has risen to about 150 billion monthly. How can we solve this problem? So we are not subsidizing other people while Nigerians are suffering.
The only solution to this problem, and I do recognize that it's a tough one, but the only solution is to get rid of this subsidy. Price petrol at the international price, okay, and get rid of this subsidy, even if it means that we then take whatever additional resources.
But Mr. Akabo, you are government, you are part of government. You should be the one getting rid of it. We should be asking you, when are you getting rid of it?
Well, Sean, as I said, this is a democracy, and so government listens to the people. You are aware that Labour says they are not having any of it. Different, interest groups, the CSOs, everybody says they're not having any of it. The government can't simply get up and announce whatever. So government is engaged in consultations about how best to do this, without creating dislocations, especially for the poorest and most vulnerable segments of the society.
We are totally out of time, Mr. Akabweze, and they're rolling the signature tune on me right now. But this is very important for you to help me tackle before we go. The Euro bonds, there's a 1-year moratorium on that. That means that you're borrowing, obviously, for the next administration to pay. You're actually borrowing and putting the burden on the next administration. Is that fair? We just have 20 seconds, Mr. Akabweze.
Well, I don't know what, I don't know what you're talking about. It's in the nature of governance that, we pay obligations created by the previous whatever, but if you put it that way, it sounds rather, petty. Unless you're suggesting government should not avail itself of the moratorium where it's available, just so you are not seen to be going, and the government is not going in another year. And there are debts from the past that are maturing today and they're being paid.
We're obviously tipped off over into the next half of the hour, and we are totally out of time. It might sound petty, but it looks like the reality and the obvious. But thank you so much, Mr. Ben Akabweze, for your time, and I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Mr. Ben Akabweze, the DG of the Budget Office. And that's our show for today. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.